Tonight on Mississippi Insight, the ballot is out. We're taking a look at the key races and breaking down the potentially confusing ballot questions. Also, the push to make sure seniors are safe at the polls, what the AARP is doing. Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. We are just 2 months away from the November election. Amid the campaigning is an underlying concern about the safety of voting this fall, particularly amid a pandemic. Seniors are among the most vulnerable to the COVID-19 virus, and the AARP is taking steps to make sure they are safe. The organization is launching Protect Voters 50 Plus, and here to tell us about it is the state director for AARP Mississippi, Kimberly Campbell. Kimberly, this is just about protecting voters. It's about mobilizing them as well. Talk a little bit about this campaign.
Absolutely. AARP, first of all, of course, is a nonpartisan organization. We don't push Democratic candidates or Republican candidates or what have you, but we do push issues. And our demographic is one of the strongest voting blocs every election cycle, especially in the presidential cycle. Those that are 50 and older, and in particular 65 and older, they show up in huge numbers, and their voice we usually will rule the day on who makes it into those seats. And so this year, we want to stay in front of the candidates. We want them to know what our demographic is concerned about. Of course, we're still concerned about protecting Social Security, making it solvent, not only for this generation, but for future generations. We're concerned about protecting Medicare. And we're also concerned about rising prescription drug costs and some local issues as well. But this is about staying in front of the candidates and also voting safely this year. COVID-19 has changed life for all of us. And so we've really been playing in the arena as to how to vote safe, what's available in different states, and to make sure our demographic gets to those polls or has the opportunity to vote absentee.
Is there concern that their voices aren't being heard?
Well, our concern is that I think they take us for granted. I think they take our demographic for granted. As I just mentioned, they know that our demographic is coming. And so they know that demographic is coming, they're going to vote. Yes, but don't take them for granted. They want to hear where you stand on certain things, because if you do not speak to those issues, you may be surprised with how they may cast their votes. And so, we just want to make sure that the things that are important to the 50 and older, it stays important. It stays in front of people, and that the candidates do address some of those issues when they get ready for, whether it's their town halls, whether it's for future debates, what have you. Voter guides, this is information, a part of our campaign that we'll be putting together. Each state will be, having some form, whether it's through social media or digital or print. We want answers to certain questions, and we're going to make sure that the voters are well informed.
Is there a concern that there could be a drop-off in senior voter turnout because of the pandemic?
That is a concern. That's a concern, whether it's going to be a drop-off or whether if it's going to be safe. Because, again, that generation, they're pretty ornery and they're determined. And so we also know that generation, even if you don't put certain protocols in place, they're probably still going to come. And so, we still want to make sure that they are safe, even if we don't, states are different. So even if we don't have things like early voting, which we don't have here in Mississippi, we do have absentee voting. And there's been some slight changes to that, and I'll just quickly will speak to that. So the legislature in the last session did say that those that were under quarantine for COVID-19, or if they were a caregiver for someone under quarantine, they could vote absentee. Just recently, though, a judge has ruled that is expanding that class just a little bit. And so now it's anyone with any, not necessarily, you don't have to be on a quarantine for COVID, but if you got underlying health conditions or, issues that would be, very detrimental for COVID, you still need a physician documentation. But now it's a bigger group of people that can actually vote absentee. And so it's things like that we want our members to know. And also we want them to know how to stay safe if you are going in person, whether that's, remember your mask, make sure that the people that are there, that they're trained, they're keeping things sanitized, they're having gloves. Just these things that we want to make sure that people do vote and that they do vote safely.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Social Security. The president is suspending the payroll tax for the 4 months, which will begin back up in January. What is the concern among seniors about the sustainability of Social Security?
Well, that's a major concern. And many of the seniors know that, depending on where you are age-wise, that your Social Security for your lifetime is probably okay. But again, that's that generation that was never concerned about themselves. That's that boomer generation. They were always concerned about, the future generation. And so you'll hear our members, they will say that. They're like, well, look, I'm 75 or, I'm 80 or I'm 65. I'm pretty comfortable that I may be okay with getting Social Security, but I want to make sure that Social Security is solvent though for future generations. I'm concerned about that. Or if they're on the earlier end, if they're 50 or 55, then then their discussion is, I don't know if we're going to have it throughout my lifetime. And so that's a concern. We believe that people have worked hard. They have paid their dues to the system, to the country. It is something that was promised to them, and we believe that it should be made solvent so that they can reap the benefits of their hard work when they need it.
What about coming to Medicare, or what should happen with Medicare?
And Medicare is the same way, that's still, action from Congress and so forth. And so there are certain safeguards, there are certain, better policies that can and should be put into place to make sure that Medicare also doesn't run out or go away. And so we want Medicare to be strong. We want it to be solvent. We want it to be able to provide the services that our members need. And so that's really crucial for our demographic. And so you'll hear them really always talking about Social Security, Medicare, and also rising prescription drug costs. That's a huge one. That's a huge one. And you'll hear that even from our younger end of our demographic, the 50-year-olds. Rising prescription drug costs is a serious issue in this country. And we really are wanting to see Congress and our, presidential leadership, step up and make some changes in that arena.
Do you think they're listening to you when it comes to those issues?
I do. The current president has made certain statements. Many of Congress has as well, even especially our Mississippi delegation in Congress. But there's more to be done. There's more to be done. I think you have two different sides that have their own version of how to attack certain things, like, let's say, prescription drug costs. You speak to anyone in Congress, red, blue, left, right of the aisle, it doesn't matter. They will all agree and say, yes, it is a problem in this country. The problem is agreeing to the solution. And that's what we want them to continue to do, is to work together, get together. Let's get away from our boxes of isolation and parties and just do what's right for the people.
Well, COVID-19 and race relations seem to be dominating the headlines these days. How concerned are seniors about these two issues?
Oh my gosh, very. So with AARP on the national level and even here on the state level, let me just speak to the state level, the work that we've done in my team, in my office. We've had several teletown halls, and in fact, we've got some coming up this month with Dr. Dobbs in particular. And so it's a big concern because from two angles. One, we've done a lot of work with the nursing homes, and so the outbreak in the nursing homes, and before they were releasing those numbers, that was one of the things that we worked with, that was one of our advocacy efforts that we were really pushing for, is that, there are still caregivers, even if your loved one is in a facility. They still need to know if there are outbreaks, how are you taking care of their loved ones? What are your protocols? What are your safety measures? Do you have enough PPEs? And so now the discussion is becoming, okay, reentry. There are some guidelines. There are some federal guidelines of best practices on how to reentry into those nursing homes. And so now we're having those discussions as to how to make this be safe. Now, our members are interesting because, again, not only, are they concerned about themselves, but this is a generation that is living longer. And so you can very well have someone that's 70 that's taking care of their 90-year-old mother. And so they're not only concerned for themselves, but they're still caregiving. And so it's a dual situation. And so we've done a lot of, webinars and a lot of virtual, offerings to really keep them informed, keep them abreast, make sure they know how to stay in touch with their healthcare providers through telehealth channels. And so we're doing what we can to kind of fill that gap, to get people to kind of navigate through this new world of COVID that we're all dealing with.
I was reading an article not too long ago where it says that nursing homes are losing money during this COVID-19. How concerned is AARP about that, and that there might not be places for family members to take their family if these nursing homes don't survive?
You know, that's always a concern. You know, our fight is not necessarily, you know, the filling up the nursing homes in a sense, but we always want to make sure that there is, you know, quality care. That is always very important to us. We want to make sure that not only are there, you know, beds and facilities available, but they're quality. And so that's always our fight. Our fight is not trying to close anyone. That's not what we try to do, but we do want to highlight who's doing good work and who's not. You know, that's just good practice, and that's just something that we should all want to be a part of when we are caregivers for our loved ones. And so, you know, a lot of our work has been around making sure that you know where they are, you know, what's going on, how qualified they are. And look, nursing homes are just like anybody else, and it's not about beating up on nursing homes. We have some of the best nursing homes in the state of Mississippi. We really do. And those that are doing great work, they never mind telling you, yes, we've got an outbreak. Yes, this is our plan of action. Yes, this is how often we test. Yes, this is how often we get shipments of PPE. Now, if you're getting crickets, then that's a problem. You know, and so that's what we want to highlight, is that if you're calling them and you're asking for information and you seem to be getting the runaround, or you're not feeling as though someone is truthful, then those are things that need to be reported.
Let's go back to voting again. The poll workers are often the retirees. Is there concern that there could be at risk if they're working at the polls?
Yeah, you know, we've been hearing a lot of that. And in fact, for instance, I probably have about 100, 150 volunteers across the state of Mississippi. And many of them are sometimes poll workers. And so many of them, they'll tell you, we're not fooling with the polls this year, you know, and we understand that. And our fight is not to encourage them to do that, first of all, because them being poll workers has nothing to do with their work with AARP. Those are two different acts of service. But we always want our members to be safe. For our work, in particular, AARP, we're not doing anything in person with our volunteers at all this year. We closed that out in March, and we said volunteers will not be active until January. At least we will revisit it come January. And that was a national mandate because we were just that concerned about our demographic and how COVID affects our demographic in particular. So we know that that's a concern, you know, and we want them to be careful if they do decide, if anyone decides and they're in that demographic to be a poll worker. But I also think that counties have got to think of another solution, because I think a lot of them of that age are not going to be workers this cycle. And so I think work has got to be done to make sure that you have enough people working those polls. And you cannot, I think, this time depend on the retirees, not like you have in past elections.
All right, Kimberly Campbell, State Director of AARP here in Mississippi. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, breaking down the ballot, the key races, and what about those potentially confusing initiatives? The November ballot is officially released. Tonight, we are taking a look at the races you'll be deciding for President, House, Senate, courts, and 3 big ballot initiatives. In the race for president, there are 9 tickets to choose from. The major parties are at the top: Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump, Mike Pence. The other 7 tickets are made up of third parties and independent candidates, including the last-minute addition of rapper Kanye West. The big statewide race is for U.S. Senate. Incumbent Cindy Hyde-Smith taking on Mike Espy in a rematch of 2018. In the U.S. House, there are contested races in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd districts. A pair of Supreme Court seats are also being contested. Those are straightforward. It's the ballot initiatives that get a little tricky, particularly medical marijuana. There are 2 initiatives and 3 choices. Initiative 65, which was put on the ballot by petition, and 65A, an alternative option that came out of the legislature. Voters are first asked whether they want either measure or neither measure. Voters who select either must then choose between Initiative 65 or the more restrictive 65A. and they must answer their second question for their vote to count. Voters who are against both initiatives can still choose between 65 and 65A, but they don't have to. So how does it pass? If more people vote for either, then the initiative that gets the most votes is the law, provided it gets approval from at least 40% of the ballots cast at the election. Got it? The other two ballot measures require a simple majority. One asks whether to do away with the rule requiring statewide office holders to win both the popular vote and a majority of House districts, and would require only the popular vote. And the last item on the ballot decides the state flag. Whether or not the In God We Trust flag with the magnolia design will fly for good. Coming up, the question over who could get an absentee ballot could be decided by the courts. The pandemic is forcing polling places to change in parts of Hinds County. Now county leaders want to have more space available if there's an emergency, and they're turning to Jackson State University. 12 News' senior political correspondent Gerald Harris shows us what's being used.
The pandemic has forced election officials to adapt, and Jackson State University is stepping up to help.
We are less than 60 days from a very important election.
2 months out, the need to protect voters has the attention of election officials. In Hinds County, the Election Commission is hoping to use large spaces like Jackson State University if there's an emergency.
As you all know, across the country, we've been dealing with locations that have been closing at the last minute, particularly that may cause issues where people have to vote. So we're here in Hinds County, we put in an emergency contingency plan, and the university has stepped up to offer their facilities to help us accommodate that.
The buildings allow for more space, opportunity to be socially distant, and they want to prepare in the event a polling place opts out or is closed due to COVID-19. It's something many states are facing. Jackson State University says it's ready to help out.
So anytime Jackson State can partner with the county and partner with the Election Commission to encourage more voting and to encourage more participation, we're always happy to do that. And again, we're very happy for this partnership. We're happy to be an emergency staging area. And we just look forward to more of these partnerships. It's in line with the mission and the goals of the university to be a true community partner here in Hinds County.
In a change, Jackson State students will vote here. Typically, they vote across the campus at the Student Center. The AAC will also be used to train poll workers for the upcoming election. 170 additional poll workers are being brought in, on top of the 560 that Hinds County brings back each election cycle. Right now, there is no concern about a poll worker shortage here. On the campus of JSU, Gerald Harris, 12 News.
It may be up to Mississippi's highest court to decide whether absentee voting will be expanded for the November election. 12 News' Tao Ta has more on what this means for voters.
It's been exactly a week since the Hinds County Chancery Court ruled that people at high risk from COVID may request an absentee ballot. Well, the Secretary of State, Michael Watson, as well as Attorney General Lynn Fitch, are appealing to the Supreme Court. I read the appeal, which says any voter who has a pre-existing condition that is not itself a physical disability cannot satisfy the statute, no matter if the voter believes that the virus might make voting in person dangerous. The legal director of ACLU Mississippi says the Secretary of State's appeal was expected and that it is still pushing for absentee voting across the board.
If you're following public health guidance by the Mississippi Department of Health or the CDC, to stay at home in order to take the necessary precautions to prevent you or your friends or family from getting COVID, then you should also be able to vote absentee under the statute that was passed this summer by the legislature.
The Secretary of State's office says they can't comment due to pending litigation, but make no mistake, safety is their #1 goal. They say they already have plans in place to provide protective gear for poll workers, including additional curbside voting, as well as mask recommendation for voters. Reporting from the Mississippi Supreme Court, Tao Ta.
Now to the race for U.S. Senate in Mississippi. Democratic challenger Mike Espy is formally challenging Cindy Hyde-Smith to a debate.
In the last cycle, when we had our campaign, we did have a debate. I look back to see what Senator Smith said. She said she would debate me because I was civil. She said that she believed in her debate skills. She said that she believed in her record. So nothing's changed. I was civil in that debate, and I will be civil in this debate.
Well, the Hyde-Smith campaign responding, telling us that nothing has been decided about a debate. The campaign spokesperson adds, quote, corrupt Mike Espy is desperate to attract any attention he can get for his failing campaign. He was too corrupt for the Clinton administration, and he's too liberal for Mississippi. So we will wait and see what gets decided. That's tonight's edition of Mississippi Insight, thanks to Kimberly Campbell from AARP Mississippi. For Gerald Harris and Tao Ta, I'm Byron Brown. Join us next week for another edition of Mississippi Insight. Until then, make it a good night.